Hello and welcome to this pre-recorded version of the WorkSafe Manual Handling Basics workshop. This recording is meant to be a revision or supplementary material for those who've already attended the live version of this webinar. My name is Paul Korchuk. I'm a trainer from Connect and a facilitator for WorkSafe for this program. It's great to have you with us here today for this recording. As we gather here today for this meeting, although physically dispersed but still virtually connected, I invite you to take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so, recognize the various traditional custodians of the land on which we do our business today, in which we're never seated. We acknowledge the elders, past and present, of all the lands on which we work and live, with gratitude and respect for their cultural, spiritual, physical, and emotional connection with their land, waters, and community. It's great to be with you here today. Thanks so much for joining us for this revision session for the Manual Handling Basics workshop. Of course, because this is not a live recording, this format will miss out on some of the live interaction and the questions and things that we might normally have during a live session, but you do have the very fortunate functionality of being able to pause this material, review, rewind, slow it down. I encourage you to keep the forms that we would normally use within the session, perhaps on the screen alongside this video, so that you can actually familiarize yourself with the tools and forms that we're going through. On the screen here, you'll see a little bit of the format that we'll follow today. It will be much like the live recorded version, where we start with a little bit of an agenda around why we're here, what the program, the Manual Handling Basics program, is about, some of the features of the program that go beyond the live workshop in today's revision session. We'll also discuss in depth some occupational health and safety obligations, some legal obligations to employers and leaders within businesses. We're going to talk a little bit about the link between manual handling and injuries. We'll talk a little bit about the risk management approach to hazardous manual handling, what that looks like, what are the different steps. We'll talk a little bit about the contributing factors to the risk of injury that maybe even go beyond some of the more obvious manual handling and physical risks that we know about. We're going to go through in quite a bit of detail a risk assessment form. We're going to also look at how we control the risks of injury posed by hazardous manual handling. And typically we'd have time for questions, but at the end of today's session, I'll make sure that we provide you with an email and details of Q&A, live Q&A sessions that you can also attend in future, should you have any questions that you'd like to discuss out of today's session. Over here in this corner, you'll see some frequently used acronyms that will be referenced right throughout the training material. OH&S stands for Occupational Health and Safety. HMH is a very common abbreviation for hazardous manual handling that you'll see throughout the material. MSD stands for musculoskeletal disorder, and of course, HSR stands for health and safety representative. We really hope that out of today's session, that by the end of today's session, we have these key learning objectives covered. Firstly, that you're able to identify what is hazardous manual handling and what does that look like in your own specific workplace. And specifically, we hope that you are familiar with and able to use the Hazardous Manual Handling Identification tool, which is a tool that you can find on WorkSafe's website. And number two, that you can identify specifically manual handling that might cause pain or discomfort in our workers or team members. And to that end, there's a really excellent tool that I encourage you to, again, download or have alongside this training material. It's called the Discomfort Survey, and it's part of the compliance code for hazardous manual handling as an appendix, and you can also find it hopefully provided as part of the materials for your live webinar as well. And point three is that we hope that you're able, out of today's session, to complete a risk assessment and also undertake consultation with workers. And to that end, there's a great tool that you can reference and use called the Hazardous Manual Handling Risk Assessment and Control Tool. Again, available on WorkSafe's website. And finally, we hope that after completing the risk assessment, that you're able to identify the most effective controls for minimizing the risk of injury from hazardous manual handling. Just by further way of introduction, my name is Paul Korchuk again. I'm a physiotherapist by background. I've been in a workplace health and safety solution and injury management role with Connect for some 12 years now. And in that time have been exposed to a whole variety of workplaces and situations that involve hazardous manual handling. And I'm really focused on providing solutions, particularly in a training space, but also in risk management, risk assessment, and helping employers find suitable controls to manage the risk from manual handling injuries. So really happy to be providing some of this training to you today and sharing some of my experience as we go. So what are some of the reasons that we have joined this manual handling basics program and are in fact studying and learning about hazardous manual handling? Well, hopefully we understand that investing in health and safety of our workers has cost benefits to us, as well as being able to improve workplace culture. There's an old saying by someone named Trevor Kletz who said that if you think safety is expensive, try having an accident. Employers who don't invest in good health and safety practices often experience high costs, like the ones that you see on your screen. Costs related to risk of injury, to the initial response of responding to incidents and injuries, the cost of repairs to equipment and workplace plant that's involved in the incident, the cost of repairs to machinery or the space in which the incident occurred, the cost of the increased workloads that occur to other staff members when we have staff members that are away or out of the workforce, the scrutiny directed at a business from both internally and externally, so the reputational damage potentially of having workplace health and safety or occupational health and safety accidents and injuries. The cost of property damage, for example, the very real costs of work cover claims and the impact that might have on workers' compensation premiums, the cost of lost productivity when we have workers that are out of the business while they're recovering, the cost of investigations to determine the root cause, for example, of an incident or injury that's occurred, or the cost of complying with, for example, a WorkSafe investigation into an accident or injury. And of course, the very real admin costs and people costs of needing to do the administration and the reports associated with accidents and injuries. So let's now think of the flip side of that and think about what are the benefits of investing in health and safety, both in terms of our budgetary investment and also our time and effort of investing in health and safety. Well, of course, the very most obvious one, the very first one, is the increased safety that we enjoy by putting time, energy, and resources into health and safety. The fact that we might see reduced absenteeism and better participation from our workforce when we don't have workers and employees suffering injury or illness, a general increase in employee well-being. We can certainly enjoy work cover savings or decreased premium costs, for example. We certainly will see less paperwork if we're having to deal less with injury and return to work and claims management, for example. The benefit of investing in health and safety is that we can identify more proactively risks to our business, both in terms of the risks to the health and safety of our people, but also the commercial risk that having accidents and injuries exposes businesses to. We have the benefit of improved productivity, where we have less workers out of the workforce while they're recovering, for example. And we have the very real benefit of improved compliance with work health and safety or occupational health and safety law, the legislation, the act and the regulations, for example. And certainly we can see better staff retention where workers feel safe, cared for, and valued in the workplace because they know and see that employers are investing in their health, safety, and well-being. So let's now take a minute to examine some statistics that are related to manual handling injuries and examine the problem that manual handling or hazardous manual handling poses to workplaces. Here on the screen, you can see quite a lot of information. There's quite a few statistics. And let's just go through them one by one. And you can even pause the screen to take a minute to digest all these numbers and statistics. They're really interesting, and some of them, I think, are quite alarming. We know that across all industries, there has been an increase in manual handling claims. The average cost to the scheme for manual handling claims last financial year was $152,000. Now, it's important to note that as manual handling claims increase, we're also seeing an increase in secondary mental injuries associated often with physical claims. So these are instances where a worker might develop something like depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, or perhaps anxiety that is related back to that initial injury or incident. And we know that these secondary mental injuries can often lead to poor health outcomes that might be related to, for example, the isolation that often comes along with workplace injury and being separated from the workplace and perhaps their social network within the workplace. But there are a whole variety of mechanisms by which a physical injury can impact someone's psychological and social health and lead to some of these secondary psychological claims. So you can see here some of these statistics that are really quite alarming. If the average cost for a manual handling claim or workers' compensation claim for financial year 2021 was $152,000, we know that that increases to around $757,000 if those claims have or carry a secondary mental injury. We see here that 65% of claims made a successful return to work within 6 months. So the flip side of that is that 35%, a really significant proportion of claims, did not make a successful return to work within 6 months. 6% of injured workers with a musculoskeletal disorder also experience a secondary mental injury. So that's quite a high proportion of claims and injuries that are progressing to this secondary mental injury here. And we know that a very large proportion of workers' compensation claims were directly the result of hazardous manual handling, something we call body stressing type injuries, more than a third at 34.6%. So clearly, hazardous manual handling poses a significant problem to workplaces all around Victoria and is something that we just simply can't ignore, but thankfully can do something about. Which brings us to the very purpose of this program. This program, the Manual Handling Basics program, is designed to assist small to medium-sized employers, that is with about 1 to 200 employees, raise your awareness to hazardous manual handling problems in your workplace, to help you understand what manual handling is and the causes of musculoskeletal disorders, but also to help you understand occupational health and safety obligations in relation to the Act and all the associated regulations, and very importantly, to help you implement a risk management approach to preventing injuries that might otherwise happen from hazardous manual handling in your workplace. And very importantly, to be able to implement controls to reduce the risk of injury and then be able to review and monitor the effectiveness of those initiatives and controls. The format of the program, if we look here at the bottom of the slide here, is that we can see that the program is broken up into a few primary components. The first of which is the education program. And this is where we had the live webinar and subsequently this video review format, which will help provide some of the education and information for you. There's also a monthly live question and answer session that's held with a WorkSafe ergonomist, a safety professional, as well as myself as the training facilitator, in which you're welcome to attend and ask any questions you have about how to implement this information within your workplace. So come with very specific questions if that will help, but also we will discuss specific topics on a regular basis within these sessions. And then there's also a component of follow-up support, whereby WorkSafe will call participants at both the 1 month and the 6 month mark to see if they can provide any other assistance, to find out how you're going with the program and the information, maybe direct you where to find tools and resources, how to access forms and follow up as needed. And also, very importantly, there's a great initiative called the Occupational Health and Safety Essentials Program. And that is a program by which you can have a safety professional provide you with very real one-to-one, face-to-face support for your business and help you implement some of the, even perform a risk assessment and help you with the risk management approach to hazardous manual handling within your business. We'll talk a little bit more about how that works in the final slides of today's presentation as well. So before we discuss hazardous manual handling, let's first define what manual handling is, noting that not all manual handling is necessarily hazardous or harmful to our health. So usually at this point in the group, I would open it up to, responses from everyone, and we come up with some interesting ideas about what makes, what is manual handling. But we've got a really great definition right there on WorkSafe's website that says that manual handling is work where we have to lift, lower, push, pull, carry, move, hold, or restrain something. So we've discussed manual handling and defined that. But what are some of the things that might make manual handling potentially hazardous or dangerous to our health? We have some guidance and a definition in the Hazardous Manual Handling Compliance Code. And the code says that hazardous manual handling means work requiring the use of force exerted by a person to lift, lower, push, pull, carry, or otherwise move, hold, or restrain a thing if that work involves one or more of the following things. So that sets the definition of manual handling if it involves one of the following things. So the repetitive or sustained application of force, a sustained awkward posture, a repetitive movement, the application of a high force, either involving a single or repetitive use of force, that it would be reasonable to expect that a person in the workforce might have difficulty undertaking. And then we have sustained vibration. We have work involving live persons or animals. And we also have work that has unstable, unbalanced loads or loads that are difficult to grasp or hold. So these are all the factors that might make manual handling potentially hazardous. It's really worth memorizing these, committing them to memory, because as we'll see in the tools that we use, these are a really useful guide to help us, I guess, examine, observe work tasks in our own work context and think about whether any of these factors actually apply. So identifying these hazardous manual handling factors in the workplace is going to be really key to then doing the risk assessment and applying a control or a solution to them. Now you'll note that some of these concepts here could be a little bit subjective, right? We've got this idea of repetitive, either repetitive force or repetitive movement. And so how often do we need to do something before it's considered to be repetitive? Well, the compliance code gives us a very good guide on this, and it says that anything that's done more than twice in a minute should be considered repetitive. Similarly, the sort of idea here of sustained, we have sustained force and sustained awkward posture. That also has some really good definition and guidance provided by the compliance code. And sustained is anything more than 30 seconds. So you'll see that for both repetitive and sustained, those concepts, as outlined in the compliance code, have a pretty low bar of what's considered to be repetitive and sustained. So I'm now going to introduce you to our case study. I'd like you to meet Joe. Joe has worked as a cleaner for the last 10 years. He loves his job. Joe works for Five Star Cleaners, that's the name of the company, and they're a great company to work for. Joe works as part of a team with his supervisor Harry and a teammate named Sue, and they pride themselves on getting jobs done quickly. They have a 5-star rating, so they do a really good job for their clients. Now, the way they work is that Harry, the supervisor, picks them up each morning in the cleaning van, and they, prior to starting work, actually do stretches to warm up together before their first job in an effort to reduce the risk of injury. And in fact, the owner of 5-Star Cleaners has actually sent them a YouTube video about stretching and warming up, and also sent some information to them about how to lift stuff safely. So let's go back to our previous slide and talk about these hazardous manual handling factors in relation to Joe. Recently, Joe started to feel his back quite a fair bit. He's been doing this work for 10 years now, and his back pain gets pretty bad on some days, especially when he uses a client's vacuum or mop that are often too short for him. And the way they work is that they always use client's equipment. But when Joe has to bend over to do vacuuming and mopping with these short handles, it really starts to hurt him. And he really does work hard. He scrubs those floors really hard. He vacuums to make sure that he picks up every last bit of dust until the floors sparkle. So the question to you is, do you think Joe does any hazardous manual handling? And if so, which of the factors that we see on the screen apply to Joe? So you might remember from our live webinar and the conversations that we had that the things that most apply to Joe are probably repetitive movement and also awkward postures. Yeah. Let's now consider too that Joe also gets a bit of a twinge when he and Mary move lounges, yeah? So part of their 5-star rating is to make sure that they get every last little bit of crumbs and dust in the house. So in fact, they tend to move lounges and heavy furniture to clean underneath them, right? And some of those lounges are quite heavy. So is this hazardous manual handling? Of course, the answer is yes. And you can probably guess which of the below apply. And then of course, that would be high force. So remember I said that anytime someone's talking about something that is heavy, that equates to the compliance code's idea of high force. So let's take a moment now to learn what a musculoskeletal disorder is. Musculoskeletal disorders is really an umbrella term for injuries to a whole variety of structures within the body. It could be an injury to a muscle, a nerve, a tendon, joint, cartilages, or even something like a spinal disc. And workers can experience a range of symptoms, including aches, pains, swelling, stiffness. They might have decreased movement across joints, and they might even experience weakness, whether that's muscular weakness or neurological weakness related to nerves. Importantly, we should also note that injuries can certainly occur acutely or suddenly, where perhaps a person does a movement or a task where they suddenly feel pain and discomfort and they know they've injured themselves in that moment. But far more commonly, musculoskeletal disorders develop gradually over time in a sort of wear and tear, overuse type mechanism and presentation. So let's go back to Joe again. You might remember that his back is starting to ache. He's feeling twinges, right? Over time, though, he's feeling these aches and twinges more and more, but he hasn't yet spoken up about it to his supervisor or his manager. Then one day, Joe wakes up and he literally cannot move. So he cannot even get out of bed. His whole back and neck feel like they're locked in a vice. Joe calls his wife to come over and investigate. His wife calls Harry, the supervisor, and tells him that Joe can't come in to work today. So a question for you would be, do you think Joe's pain is an example of a sudden or acute injury, or is it a chronic musculoskeletal disorder? And the right answer here is that more likely Joe is experiencing the symptoms of a chronic musculoskeletal disorder that is built up over a prolonged period of time from repeated or continuous use of the same body parts. And so even though Joe has noticed these symptoms quite suddenly and things have come to a head for him, we know that he's had symptoms in the past which really presented as early warning signs. And so Joe's injury here really should be classified more as a chronic injury. So certainly this concept of musculoskeletal disorders occurring gradually over time can present some challenges in the way that we identify and manage these types of injuries. But this can also present a sort of opportunity of sorts. So let's examine the space between sort of the first appearance of symptoms and when an injury is then eventually diagnosed, and then perhaps a claim is lodged, and we see other potentially negative rehabilitation outcomes down the track, which as sometimes occurs with musculoskeletal disorders. There is a lot of space here between those early onset of symptoms like pain and discomfort, things that the worker might experience, and also some of the signs. These are things that can be observed, like absenteeism, perhaps, or task avoidance, that is, that tasks that are obviously challenging or causing some discomfort to workers being passed around like a hot potato, where people don't really particularly want to do them. These are all early warning signs to employers and leaders and managers that perhaps something needs to be done, and we have this opportunity here to do something before these symptoms progress to an injury. Besides these early warning signs and symptoms, we can also proactively consider and look for, identify hazards and hazardous manual handling, and proactively look to reduce the risk of injury and the risk of musculoskeletal disorders by proactively trying to reduce those hazards or put in some controls. And so this is effectively the reason we need to act as early as we can in this piece. By acting as soon as someone complains of pain or discomfort, or as soon as you notice workers avoiding certain tasks or increasing sick days, you might just be able to prevent things from progressing to the later stages of an injury. And relating this back to Joe, we can think, well, what could have been done differently in Joe's situation? What could Joe's employer have done to prevent Joe's back from getting to the point where Joe couldn't get out of bed? And of course, firstly, it would have been great if Joe felt comfortable speaking up about his injury. And we might have to have a critical think about why it might be the case that workers sometimes don't feel comfortable speaking up about pain and discomfort. We also might need to proactively look out for the early warning signs and symptoms like stiffness, aches and pains, and decreased range of motion. It's also important to be able to have conversations in the workplaces around safety and health and well-being that workers don't associate with, being a negative or confrontational or aggressive type discussion. And we know that these early discussions about pain and discomfort and challenges with work tasks really can benefit everybody involved down the track. We often, unfortunately, see employers go to options such as retraining staff or trying to get staff to approach a task in a different way, or perhaps even just accepting that injuries and discomfort and pain is part of the job. And maybe some employers might even take the view that it is a normal part of our process to replace older workers with younger workers. And none of those solutions just mentioned is really going to protect our people from injury moving forwards and not going to make for a safer workplace. So it's really important to act as early as we can with musculoskeletal disorders, have conversations as early as possible to allow you to identify tasks, work that are causing pain and discomfort. And then as employers, leaders, and managers to really focus on the work characteristics rather than the individual worker and look to change things about those work tasks. So redesigning work to reduce hazardous manual handling is going to have really significant improvements for all of our workers. And all of our workers, regardless of age, gender, work history, physical attributes, and lifestyle, can be affected by hazardous manual handling. And a minor niggle can easily turn into a really significant injury if hazardous manual handling is not addressed. And apart from all those reasons that we talked about earlier as to the costs of injury to a business, we also know that musculoskeletal disorders and injury have a really significant impact on a personal level on our workers' life. You know, a musculoskeletal disorder will not only affect the person's work life, but their personal life. A workplace injury does not clock off at the end of a shift. It comes home with us. So if workers are reporting or experiencing pain and discomfort, start by having a conversation. And conversations with our workers are a really important part of the way that we manage hazardous manual handling. We like to ask the question now, what are some of the tools and ways that you approach these sorts of conversations with your workers? And one tool that we really recommend using is something like a discomfort survey. And we're going to talk about this tool specifically in a little while. But this all leads well onto the very important topic of consultation with workers. So we're going to play a video now for you on this concept of consultation.
If you're a Victorian employer, you've probably already worked hard to make changes in your workplace to keep your employees healthy and safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's great. But do you realise it's your legal obligation to consult with your staff in developing actions in any matter that affects health and safety? If there is a health and safety representative at your workplace, you must involve them in consultation too. So, what does it mean to consult? Simply updating employees as things change is not consultation. Instead, consultation means giving staff the chance to shape the health and safety decisions made in the workplace. Consultation can take many forms. Importantly, it needs to be available in a format and language that each employee can understand. Meetings, conversations, group talks, phone calls and emails all contribute to you gathering valuable insights and ideas from those on the front line. Here's an example. With the need to become COVID safe quickly, an employer implemented a range of safety measures at work, including extra personal protective equipment, as well as hand sanitising stations. Although staff welcomed the changes, they were concerned the measures didn't go far enough. Employees didn't understand how to apply the changes, and they felt there were extra ways to make the workplace COVID safe. The employer held a group discussion with the staff and the health and safety representative to listen and take on board the employees' input and ideas. This conversation led to extra improvements being agreed upon, including training in how to use the personal protective equipment, cleaning rules for using shared equipment, and daily temperature checks. The result? Employees felt safe, supported, and part of the solution. If there is a suspected or confirmed COVID-positive case in your workplace, there are a number of things you will need to do. Consultation with staff and health and safety representatives is one of those things. Your staff will need to understand how they will be impacted and be given the opportunity to contribute to any workplace changes. You can stay up to date with what you need to do by visiting our website for further information. As a Victorian employer, consultation is always your responsibility. It's an ongoing requirement that is as important as ever during the COVID-19 pandemic.
So having watched that video, hopefully you have some of the key takeaways that were intended by that video. One of the things that we usually ask in the workshop here is, what are your key takeaways and understanding now about what we mean when we use the word consultation? And of course, consultation is required by law. That was a really important key takeaway. And the law says that employers must consult, so far as reasonably practicable, with workers who are or are likely to be directly affected by any of the health and safety matters. If there's a health and safety representative present, you must also involve them in consultation. So we know that involving workers in health and safety issues can result in a much safer workplace, and we should really embrace and encourage consultation. We know from the video that consultation is about two-way communication. It is not simply about informing workers about decisions that have been made or about things that we are changing about the workplace, but it's about speaking with them on their views and seeking their views on a matter and considering those views before a decision is made. And we know that we can really gain valuable insight into hazards, risks, and even controls and solutions from workers who very well understand often the risks associated with the work that they do. And we also know that by involving workers in the process, it gives them a much stronger sense of commitment to any actions that are going to be implemented. And communicating on health and safety matters can also help to build cooperation and trust between employers and workers. So a really important question is, what are some of the ways that you consult with your workers in the workplace? What types of forums do you use? What types of both formal and informal methods of consultation do you use? And do you use any specific tools? And so this brings us to the discomfort survey, which is a really great tool that you can find on WorkSafe's website. It also makes up part of the appendix in the Hazardous Manual Handling Compliance Code, which is a document, again, that you can get from WorkSafe's website, and you may have gotten a copy in the live version of this. This is a really great tool that you can give directly to your workers. It's quite simple to complete, and it will help you identify work tasks that are causing your workers to experience discomfort, and that might result in a musculoskeletal disorder. So let's have a look at this form together, and imagine that we have Joe, our worker from 5 Stars Cleaning, completing this in relation to his back discomfort. So looking at this first page of the form, you'll see that it's very simple. It asks to include a name and a date. Now keep in mind that you can use this form anonymously. If you think that you're going to get better quality information, more detail, if you make this form anonymous and voluntary, then by all means you can make it anonymous and not leave an option for a name. But certainly that option is there. So it prompts to provide a job location, a supervisor, to indicate whether manual work is involved. And here for Joe, we see that that is yes. Manual work is definitely involved. We see that Joe has been in the role for more than 5 years. We see in the body map section that Joe has indicated very clearly that he has lower back pain on the right side here. In the next section, it asks Joe and prompts him to rate the level of or intensity of his pain, and here Joe has indicated an unbearable amount of pain. In section 3, it asks Joe to consider the frequency or how often he experiences pain, and here we see that Joe has indicated sort of several times per day, hasn't he? So that's pretty significant, and that combined with this severity down here immediately tells me as a reviewer of this form that we need to do something urgently, doesn't it? In section 4, it prompts what does Joe think caused the problem, and Joe's given us a few different options. He's indicated that lifting furniture, having to use clients' equipment, and bending down to vacuum and mop has contributed or caused his problem. This is all very valuable information for me as a leader in a business wanting to know, where do the hazards for hazardous manual handling and risks to injury exist in our business. And in section 5, it prompts, do you have any suggestions? And Joe has indicated that he would like for the business to provide mop and vacuums with adjustable handles, provide a bucket with wheels, for example, and ask clients to move furniture in advance. All really great ideas. And one last one, to schedule cleans so as to allow for more breaks. So immediately, just by consulting with Joe using a very simple form, as a leader or as an employer, I now have some immediate options I can consider to actually help make the workplace safer and certainly to reduce Joe's own discomfort. So really great tool to use. I encourage you to use this or a version of this in your business, but this is a really great tool that's ready to go straight away. And another really great tool that you can use to further this concept of consultation is the use of a video. And there's a great video that WorkSafe have put together called Manual Handling 101, a guide for employers and workers in every industry. And you'll find this on WorkSafe's website. And the intention here is that it's a really quick explainer and a conversation starter, so that if you play this, for example, for your workers in a staff meeting or at a toolbox talk, or provide it to them in an email, for example, this is a great way to start a conversation about the topic of hazardous manual handling.
Every day, we lift, lower, push, pull, hold, and restrain. And in the workplace, we call this manual handling.
Use a keyboard, load a truck, push a wheelchair, pram or wheelbarrow. All manual handling.
Manual handling can become hazardous in certain circumstances. For instance, when a task involves sustained high force, repetitive movements, or holding an awkward posture for a long time.
It's one of the most common causes of injury in the workplace across every industry, and it can lead to injuries known as musculoskeletal disorders.
So it's time you took a closer look at manual handling in your workplace.
The good news is that MSDs are preventable when we know what to look for.
While injuries can suddenly occur at work, MSDs often build up over time while performing the same tasks repetitively.
This means there are usually warning signs before an injury occurs. Pain, stiffness, aches, and inflammation are all symptoms of a potential MSD.
Pain from work is never okay. So workers, we encourage you to speak up as soon as you feel pain or discomfort while working.
Employers, we know that each workplace is unique. The key to making your workplace safer and reducing the risk of injury is to work through the risk management process. This is essential for every workplace. Employers, it's something you must do as part of your OHS obligations.
Improving safety in the workplace is a continual process. Talking with the people doing the work, or in other words, consultation, is an important part of risk management. It's crucial, and it's a chance to get great suggestions for making the work safer. Finally, a reminder for workers and employers.
Always be aware of hazardous manual handling in your workplace.
Look around. What can you see? Are there activities that workers find difficult or cause pain or discomfort? WorkSafe provides guidance and tools to help you with risk management.
It's time to act. Head to the WorkSafe website for resources to help you make a start.
Okay, so a little bit of a true or false quiz for you here. Tell me whether this statement is true or false. There are specific occupational health and safety legal obligations relating to hazardous manual handling specifically. Do you think that's true or false, that statement? Hopefully, if you've done this as a live webinar and you've already seen this material, you remember that that is absolutely true. There are, in fact, legal obligations to employers with regards specifically to hazardous manual handling. And we're going to look at what those are now.
Employers, hazardous manual handling is one of the most common causes of musculoskeletal disorders, or MSDs, in every industry. MSDs are injuries such as sprains and strains, back injuries, soft tissue injuries, hernias, and chronic pain.
Sadly, in some workplaces, these injuries are so common that they're just seen as part of the job. Having a workplace injury can have a big impact on your business too, with a loss of productivity and the need to replace staff.
By changing how you think about manual handling and improving the workplace consultation process, it is possible to reduce the risk of MSDs at work, benefiting your workers, your business, and your premiums.
Employers, let's talk about your OHS obligations around manual handling. There are three main OHS regulations that relate to hazardous manual handling, and each have actions you must take.
Firstly, Regulation 26. You must identify any work that involves hazardous manual handling. There are lots of tools on the WorkSafe website to help you identify the types of work to look for. Then, Regulation 27. You can't just rely on training to control risks associated with hazardous manual handling. Instead, you need to try and eliminate the risk of MSDs associated with hazardous manual handling itself. If that's not possible, then you need to change the way you do the work to make the job safer. And finally, Regulation 28. This regulation is about making sure that you've got the most effective risk controls in place. As things change over time at work, you must review and, if necessary, revise your controls to make sure they are still effective.
Your risk controls need reviewing when an MSD is reported at your workplace, before making changes to the way the work is done, after a notifiable incident involving hazardous manual handling has occurred, if a health and safety representative makes a request for a review, if you get new information about hazardous manual handling at work, or if for any other reason the risk controls don't adequately control the risks.
The takeaway here is that improving safety in the workplace is a continual process, and talking to your workers, in other words consultation, is crucial.
The responsibility sits with you, the employer, to create a safe workplace for your workers.
Visit the WorkSafe website for guidance, tools and resources to prevent MSDs in your workplace.
So let's really zero in on some of those concepts explored and introduced in that video. And this diagram here is a really nice explainer that we'll refer to right throughout the rest of this training session. The take-home message here from that video is that employers have very specific legal duties to employees when it comes to hazardous manual handling. And these details are set out in the occupational health and safety regulations. Specifically, employers need to identify work that involves or will involve hazardous manual handling by employees. And that includes, remember, hazardous manual handling includes those very specific concepts that are mentioned in the hazardous manual handling compliance code that we also referred to maybe about a dozen slides or so ago. That's things like repetitive force, repetitive movement, sustained force, sustained awkward postures. Remember that long list of things. Those are all hazardous manual handling. So by law, employers need to undertake at least this first step to identify hazards, including hazardous manual handling. And you'll see here that this risk management process is required by the occupational health and safety regulations. And each one of these steps relates to a different part of the occupational health and safety regulations. So regulation number 26 refers to this need for employers to identify hazardous manual handling. Now, regulation 27 goes straight on to speaking about controlling the risk of injury of musculoskeletal disorders. It kind of skips this step here at step 2, which is to do a risk assessment or assess the level of risk posed by particular tasks. And that's because often employers can go straight from identifying hazardous manual handling to then controlling it, right? We often don't need to go through a lengthy or complex risk assessment in order to control that risk or implement a solution. And this little shortcut here in the diagram that goes from step 1 straight to step 3 kind of reflects that. So if you have, as an employer or as a leader, a really obvious solution to a hazardous manual handling problem, you can by all means go straight to step 3 and implement that solution as a control. You do not have to do a risk assessment before you can do a control. However, it is a great idea to do a risk assessment, as this will provide a more thorough analysis of maybe any other hazards that we missed, and also the different types and levels and severity of risk to help further inform and help you decide on what types of controls will be most ideal. Okay, so we should also, at step 2, assess, where necessary, any risk of musculoskeletal disorder from hazardous manual handling, and then, where possible, go on to eliminate the risk of musculoskeletal disorder from hazardous manual handling so far as is reasonably practicable. And if it's not reasonably practicable to completely eliminate that risk of injury, then employers must do what they can to reduce the risk of injury by altering the workplace or altering the way we approach the work, the systems of work, or by changing the materials and equipment that are used, by providing mechanical aids, etc., or preferably a combination of things. But in some way, we need to control the risks. And then the last step in the risk management process for hazardous manual handling is to review and, if necessary, change our risk controls. So this is really important, that over time we are reviewing, are the things that we implemented here in step 3, our solutions, are they being effective over time? Are we seeing less injuries, less incidents, less near misses? And if not, or if we still deem that something can be improved, that we're also introducing better controls or newer controls. And you can see that this is a cycle. So the intention here with this risk management process is not that we go through it once in a linear fashion and then we're done, but that we repeat this as a cycle in a spirit of continuous improvement. Every 6 months, every year, reviewing and going through this process. Understanding that it takes time to develop these work health and safety practices. You'll notice that underpinning every one of these steps here, or rather overarching each of these steps, is this concept of consultation. So in the OH&S Act, Section 35, we talked about this, the duty of employers to consult with workers. That applies to every step within this this risk management process. So when we're identifying hazards, we can consult with workers. When we're doing a risk assessment, we can consult with our workers. When we're considering, choosing, and implementing controls, we can consult with our workers. And then, of course, when we are reviewing the effectiveness of our controls, we should consult with our workers. Okay, so a little while ago, we spoke about the concept of musculoskeletal disorders. We understand what they are, but let's now look a little bit more closely at how musculoskeletal disorders occur. There's a really simple answer that musculoskeletal disorders occur when the load placed on our body, or the demands placed on our body, is greater than our tissue's capacity to deal with that load or the work. So what does this mean? Well, essentially injuries occur when you're asking your body to cope with something that it can't really tolerate. This is the case with all injuries. We can think about this as a backpack. So we can imagine that everyone, including yourself, has a backpack. Now we start to fill our backpack with rocks. Now as you can imagine that as you continue to add rock after rock after rock, eventually your backpack is going to reach its maximum capacity that it can hold for rocks before it breaks. And what happens if we reach the bag's capacity? Well, the bag will break. And the same thing happens with injuries. We think about the human body, and we understand that our tissues have their own sort of capacity. Our muscles, our tendons and ligaments have a sort of maximum stress or strain or work that they can tolerate. And these soft tissues in our body can adapt and change. And those changes can be positive or negative. So if we are constantly applying a strain or stress to these tissues over time, they can degrade. they can deteriorate. Just like our backpack will wear out and eventually break. Now, interestingly, tissues can also respond and adapt in positive ways. So in the way that, as an example, our muscles can become stronger, bigger in size, more muscle fibers packed into each bundle over time if we continually exercise it. And that's a positive adaptation. But sometimes those adaptations to overuse or strain and stress can be negative over time. Now let's zero in on this concept of high force. So depending on the work that we're looking at and the hazardous manual handling that we might encounter, a high force may be just a one-off event. So here in this example here, as a practical example, we see someone lifting a box, and we presume it's heavy because we're talking about high force. Now, also we can apply this to Joe in our example of Joe the cleaner, who collects large, empty mop buckets from his van and then takes it inside to the resident's house, fills it with water, and now that mop bucket is heavy. And now if we look at what's happening on this graph here, we can relate this to what Joe is doing. Yeah. So as he picks up the empty bucket, we can see that in this first line here, this first peak, Joe's picking up the empty bucket, and there's only a small amount of strain or force being generated and resisted by the tissues. But over time, let's imagine that Joe then picks up a very heavy mop bucket. This line here represents the amount of force required to pick up the full bucket. Now, if that force that's required exceeds the tissue's capacity, that's represented here by the blue line, that's when an injury occurs. And so we can see that with the hazardous manual handling of high force, that it may only just be one instance that this hazard is applied that can lead to an injury. We know that workers are more risk of injury if the effort involved in a task is really high. So we can simply talk to our employees and find out what are the tasks that they find physically difficult. What are the tasks that they don't like to do or often neglected or often trying to palm off to someone else, right? That's a good indication that those tasks involve too high a force. We can also think about the speed of movement. We know that the faster the movement, the greater the risk of injury because it involves a higher force, particularly when movements are repeated. We know that when movements are sudden or jerky, like throwing or catching things, or trying to restrain something that moves, for example, unexpectedly, that can also increase our risk of injury. We also know that the size of the muscles involved affect the level of injury. So smaller muscles, like the small muscles, fine muscles of the hand, will get injured with less force required than, say, the very strong muscles of the legs, of the glutes, of the thighs, for example. So really we need to look at the type of work that employees are performing and see if any of these factors are involved and whether high force is involved. What about repetition? Let's have a look at how repetition can lead to injury. Again, if we think back to Joe, during his workday, remember that Joe must repeatedly bend down low to vacuum and mop because of the short handles that he's using. And so he's using the same muscles over and over and over again in that mopping and vacuuming action. And when you keep using the same muscles and soft tissue over and over again, they become fatigued naturally. Now we know that a fatigued muscle has a lower capacity to deal with force and cope with force. Now on top of this, when we see, if we look at this example in the graph at the top, we can see that our rest period, when we have a repetition, and then we have a rest period, that our tissue's capacity starts to improve again. As we rest, our tissue's capacity for load increases again. But Compare that to the example at the very, very bottom, where we just have repetitive movement happening over and over again without any rest breaks. There's none of that opportunity for soft tissues to recover. And over time, you can see where this is heading. The tissue's capacity will intersect the level of force and load here represented by the yellow line, and that's when an injury occurs. You'll notice that in this example, in this graph, that the weight was constant throughout, and it didn't really require a high force, did it? It just required a relatively low or moderate force that was repetitive without any rest. Okay, so we know that this sort of buildup of fatigue and exhaustion in the muscles will eventually lead to a failure of tissues to cope and thus injury. And so as a general guide, we need to also remember that a repetitive movement is one that is performed more than twice a minute. Anything that's performed more than twice a minute, we should consider repetitive. So let's have a look now at this concept of sustained force or sustained awkward posture. Remember here now that the definition is that a posture of force that is held more than 30 seconds at a time. That's how we define sustained. So it's a pretty low bar in terms of how we define sustained. So let's have a look at how sustained forces and postures can lead to injury. Referring back to our case study, if we think about Joe, Joe might be holding his arms overhead for prolonged periods of time to dust and reach, for example, the top corners of clients' rooms. Now, when we talk about sustained postures, we're talking about postures where there's no muscle movement. So we're talking about Joe reaching and adopting a shoulder reaching posture. His hand might be moving, he might be dusting up here, but his shoulder's in a constant reaching position, right? So there's none of this contraction, relaxation, just constant muscle contraction. Now imagine holding your body in a single position for a long period of time. You can intuitively know that over time, those muscles and structures are going to fatigue. So let's have a look at what's happening in the graph. If we look at the graph, the yellow line is showing us that we are staying in one position. Look what's happening to your muscles when you do this. As you stay in one position for an extended period of time, this leads to, for example, decreased muscle flow to your, decreased blood flow rather to your muscles by virtue of the fact that when muscles contract, they provide a little bit of a compression force to all the structures within them. And without that relaxation, we're effectively cutting off some of the blood flow to those smaller vessels. And without the relaxation phases, muscles will have reduced blood flow, less oxygen and nutrients are sent to your muscles. There's no, removal of the buildup of waste products. If anyone has ever sort of felt the burn while you're doing sustained exercise, this is really that buildup of waste products from your muscles, making them more easily fatigued. So we can see in that graph that the longer you hold a fixed position, even if there's no movement, that the tissue capacity, again, continues to decrease over time. And when the tissue's capacity decreases to a point where, the load is exceeding the tissue's capacity, we again wind up with an injury. Now combine this with the concept of an awkward posture. The term awkward posture refers to any posture where body parts are away from their comfortable neutral position. So for example, for the shoulder, an awkward posture would be sustained, lifting the arms overhead or above shoulder height. For the lower back, an awkward posture would be bending low in a stoop or excessive twisting. Now, if you want to get down into the nitty-gritty of just how much we need to move out of our neutral range for it to become awkward, well, the Hazardous Manual Handling Compliance Code goes into some really great detail, even to the point of supplying joint ranges of motions in degrees, like how much elevation do we need to elevate before we consider the shoulder reaching an awkward posture. But in general, we just consider that if we are moving out or away from our comfortable neutral position for a joint that is in awkward posture. So if we hold awkward postures, like these examples here, for more than 30 seconds at a time, we can consider that a sustained awkward posture, which is a hazardous manual handling factor. Add on top of this that many tasks are done for what we call long duration. So that is when we perform a task for more than 2 hours over the course of a whole shift, accumulatively, or for 30 minutes at a time without a break. So these are two different concepts, a sustained force or sustained awkward posture, but also any of these risk factors like repetition, repetitive movement, vibration, all those things can also occur over what we call long duration. So more than 2 hours over the shift or 30 minutes continuously. So it's very common for us to get asked, either in this training or when I visit workplaces, is how much is a safe lifting limit? How much can someone safely lift? Can we put some guidelines around that? And the short answer is that no, there are no magic numbers. And you certainly won't find any specific numbers or kilograms within WorkSafe's guidance material or the Hazardous Manual Handling Compliance Code, because there are just simply too many factors to consider, and you cannot put a blanket safe lifting limit. Now, we do see and hear employers doing this, where they might have an administration type control in place where they say anything greater than this number of kilos is a team lift, for example. But in reality, it's impossible for us to put a hard and fast rule on what's safe to lift. That's just because there are too many variables to consider. We can think about this in practical terms as one example of one of the factors that's involved is, for example, how the load is held. So take something that's around you off of your desk. Let's say I've got some snacks here. I've got a container, a little rather big container of some nuts. Now, if I hold this close to me, it's pretty light. I could probably hold this all day, right? But take the example of if I hold this away from me as far as I can now, suddenly this small amount of weight is going to feel pretty heavy even after 30 seconds, right? So I encourage you to try this. But you would intuitively know and understand that if you hold something away from you, it starts to feel heavy after a little while. And that's just simply because of some of the simple physics of how fulcrums and levers work. Let's have a look at this in some more specific numbers. We know that if we take a load, in this example 4 kilos, and hold it out in front of you, 60 centimeters, that about 3 times the level of force is required to hold that load. And that's just simply because of the physics acting at the spine and the shoulders and the long levers that are involved here. So that's just one example of one of the factors that's involved in determining what's safe to lift. The same kilograms placing a very different amount of load on tissue structures depending on how far away it is from your body. There are a whole host of other factors that we need to consider too. So, for example, the environment. Are we working in extreme heat, or are we working in really cold conditions where our muscles aren't warmed up? What are the types of forces that we're interacting with? Pushing, pulling, carrying, lifting, lowering. Those forces are all different in the way they act on our body. What about the postures that we're adopting? Are we lifting from an awkward posture, for example? That will immediately limit what's safe to lift if we're in an awkward posture as well. What types of movements are we adopting? What's the layout of the workplace? How frequently are we doing this lift? And how long do we have to hold each of those positions? And then, of course, environmental factors, which we mentioned before, but also even how the work is organized, so the way we design the task. All of these things need to be considered before we can even think about what's a safe lifting limit, because all of these things help determine what the risk of injury is. So in short, there is no one safe lifting limit. Now, before we leave the topic on why injuries occur, we also want to point out that these factors around the way tissues adapt are also associated with health. So we actually do need a certain amount of exertion on our body for our tissue capacities to increase, for our bodies to get stronger and fitter and adapt in healthy ways to the work that we do every day. So to live our daily life and be healthy, we need to do repetitive movements, move through large ranges of motion. We need to exert forces. So thinking about things like even walking is a repetitive movement and repetitive force. Throwing the ball overhead, bending down to help, a child skateboard. We might be in a stooped posture for a while. We might have to lift live heavy loads as we lift our children up from the ground, for example. When we go shopping, we lift shopping bags. So, there are all sorts of things that we do in our daily life that would be considered manual handling if they were done in a workplace setting. So remember that, manual handling is not all bad, and not all the forces that we place on our body are necessarily harmful, but we do need to pay special attention to forces that we are exposed to within a workplace setting where those are very frequent, very repetitive, and done for over long durations and for an extended period of time over weeks, months, and even years in many cases. So we're now going to come back to this concept of risk management and look at the process of how we manage the risk of hazardous manual handling in the workplace. We're going to refer back to this 4-step process that we've alluded to previously. We looked at these steps and we looked at how these steps relate to the requirements on employers as set out by the OHS regulations. And firstly, we're going to look more in depth at this very first step of identifying hazards. Specifically, how do we identify hazardous manual handling in the workplace? Importantly, we're going to take you through this tool supplied by WorkSafe called the Hazardous Manual Handling Identification Tool. So this is a simple form that's available on WorkSafe's website. It's also available as an appendix in the Hazardous Manual Handling Compliance Code. And you should have also received a copy as part of the initial live training. But we're going to put that tool into practice in a few minutes. So there are a number of methods and ways that we can identify hazardous manual handling in the workplace. And the very first one we've already spoken about. It's really simply to consult with our workers. Our workers can provide really valuable information about the types of hazards that they encounter every day. They can also tell you specifically about the sort of muscular aches and pains or musculoskeletal concerns that they have. And so we encourage you, as part of this process of identifying hazardous manual handling, to use the discomfort survey as part of that process. Of course, we can also just simply observe work activities. So as leaders within the business, as business owners, as work health and safety practitioners, we can look at work activities. And we can refer back to the Hazardous Manual Handling Identification Tool as a reminder for what are the different activities that could be potentially hazardous. So you remember back to that list of things that we saw around repetitive force, repetitive movement, sustained force, sustained awkward posture, difficult to grasp loads, vibration, all those things. We can simply look at the tasks our workers are carrying out and try to identify whether those factors are involved in those tasks. We can also review readily available information by looking at things like workplace injury records, past incident reports, past hazard reports, even look at past workers' compensation claims, and look at whether any of that information will also give us some insight as to the manual handling hazards that exist in the workplace. And we can look for trends within that data. We can also look for information and trends that are available for our work industry. So looking at our industry bodies, looking at other workplaces or other businesses that you know about and sharing information, looking for trends within our industry, because each industry is different and we all have our very unique set of manual handling challenges. So these are all ways that we can learn more about the risks and hazards that are within our business. We can also look for information that's available on WorkSafe's website. So WorkSafe have a wide variety of guidance materials, some of which is specifically geared at particular industries, and that information is also really helpful in helping to identify hazardous manual handling that's particular to your industry. So let's have a look in a bit more detail now at the hazardous manual handling identification form, and we're going to apply that to Joe specifically and his situation. Wonderful. So let's have a look at this form or tool. So you can see that it's about 4 pages long. And let's zoom in and actually try and fill this form out together. You might remember in the live version of this, we actually filled this out together for Joe. But let's just orient ourselves to this particular document here. All right, so you can see at the very top, it provides a little bit of a preamble and some information around what hazardous manual handling is. It reminds you about the link between hazardous manual handling and musculoskeletal disorders, and gives you some information around where you can get more information if you need it, and it has a link directly there to the compliance code for hazardous manual handling. The next section instructs us what to do. So it gives us some guidance as to the fact that we can observe work activities. We can use examples provided to decide if work postures, if the work tasks involve postures, movements, or forces that are hazardous. It reminds us to consult with our health and safety representatives and employees. It reminds us to review records and available information, and also any guidance material that's been provided, say by WorkSafe, for example. Also reminds us to record any work that involves hazardous manual handling, and then revise the hazardous manual handling identification tool regularly. So not just to do this process once, but to come back over time and look at it periodically. It also reminds us what to do if we have identified hazardous manual handling. And it says if there are controls already in place and the work is not causing pain or injuries, you don't need to do anything else. If you are aware of higher order controls, that is more effective controls, then we need to use those if it's reasonably practicable to do so. It reminds us that doing a risk assessment will also help identify the sources of risk and perhaps more effective controls. And it says that we should conduct a risk assessment if employees report difficulty, pain, or discomfort, and if you're not sure about the risks and the most suitable controls to manage them. But remember, as we looked at the risk management process, that you can, of course, go straight from identification, this process here, to implementing controls right away. So this next section reminds us to look for manual handling that uses postures, movements, and forces that are hazardous. And it gives us some really good reminders about what those sorts of things are. So the repetitive application of force gives us some practical examples. What about sustained application of force? The application of high force, handling a live person or handling live animals, sustained awkward postures, repetitive movements, unstable, unbalanced, or difficult to grasp or hold loads, exposure to whole body, or single hand-arm vibration. So it gives us a nice little bit primer and reminder on what we're looking for in our identification process. And here's where we start documenting what we are identifying. So now this form has examples or room for more than one example of work, right? So you see example of work 1 and example of work 2. And the intention here is that you can do your own identification process for each type of work or each task separately within the business, rather than thinking about and trying to analyze the whole role at once. So in Joe's example, we would specifically perhaps maybe take one component of Joe's work and talk about vacuuming and mopping, two similar kind of aspects of the cleaning role. So let's provide a description of the work that involves manual handling. Joe, well, let's just not even relate this specifically to Joe, but within the team, teams are responsible for vacuuming and mopping clients' homes. Okay? So you can put as much detail as you like within this description, enough that an external reader who doesn't know anything about the type of work that you do can understand exactly what you're talking about. So put as much detail as you need to help another person understand that. In the work hazards section, it prompts us to look for specific types of hazards. So if we think about Joe's vacuuming and mopping, does it involve repetitive or sustained application of force? I would say yes, definitely. It does involve awkward posture. We remember because the handles are too short often. It definitely involves repetitive movement. It does involve high force, remember, because we move furniture. So we're going to say yes to that one. Look, I don't really think that it involves exposure to sustained vibration. It doesn't involve handling live persons or animals, but it does involve handling some unstable or unbalanced loads. Remember that we have to handle a mop bucket, which has liquids sloshing around in it. So I think that could be a yes as well. Now, does the work cause pain, discomfort, difficulty, or injuries? I would say to that one that we could say a firm yes, because we have information from Joe that indicates that yes, that's the case. So what risk controls are already in place with regards to mopping and vacuuming at clients' homes? Well, we know that the boss had tried to implement a few initiatives. If you remember back to the initial description we provided, we do pre-work warm-ups. And there was a video shared on the same. And Joe's boss also provided them, not how to lift videos on both the warm-ups and also how to lift. So there are some risk controls in place. I'm not too sure about the effectiveness of these two in terms of addressing manual handling as a hazard. Now, if hazardous manual handling has been identified, we must control the risk. So the tool here instructs us to do a risk assessment if employees report difficulty, pain, discomfort, or injuries, or if you're not sure about the risks and the most suitable controls on how to manage them. And so it also provides a link here to a WorkSafe resource called the Hazardous Manual Handling Risk Assessment and Control Tool. And that's exactly what we're going to go through now. But you could repeat this process for any other aspect of Joe's work or for work tasks within your business. And it really pays to treat these tasks separately and analyze the tasks one at a time. So for example, for Joe, we might have a whole separate example of work that involves perhaps cleaning bathrooms or dusting or something that's distinctly different from a physical demands point of view. We would probably treat differently for the purpose of identifying hazards. All right, so we've identified some of the hazardous manual handling risk factors that apply specifically to Joe. But now let's come back to his case study. We'll give you a little bit more information. And we're going to think a little bit beyond perhaps just those initial hazardous manual handling factors and think about what else is going on. So we know Joe has had some aches and pains from bending when he's using his short-handled mop and vacuum cleaner. He also has some twinges when he and Harry lift heavy couches. And we know these are examples of things like repetitive movement, application of high force. But let's think a little bit beyond some of these things. It might help you to know that Joe's team works in all kinds of weather. So being in Melbourne, we know that the weather can change pretty radically throughout the day. Sometimes it's really cold, other days it's really hot. Sometimes we experience all that within the same day. Add on top of that the cleaning van is getting old and the heater and air conditioner don't actually work very well. Some of the locations that they work at are all different as well. Some houses, the floors can get very slippery. Some houses, have very firm traction. Some houses have air conditioning. Some houses do not. Add on top of this that Joe's other teammate, Sue, is always telling Joe to hustle up, work faster. She likes to keep track of the schedule and is really hung up on the ratings that they get from clients. She loves being the best. Their boss is always giving their team new clients, and they often need to eat lunch while driving between jobs in order to stay on track. They often don't get much of a break until right at the end of the day. Now, Joe doesn't like to say anything about this or complain. He loves his job, the money is good, and he hasn't done any other types of work in a long time, so he doesn't want to really rock the boat or create any dramas in the workplace. So let's consider some of these factors. So it's important to note that musculoskeletal disorders are not only caused by hazardous manual handling factors like repetitive force, sustained force, awkward postures, all those physical things that we've been talking about, but it's important to note that musculoskeletal disorders can also be contributed to by what we call psychosocial hazards and factors. Psychosocial hazards include things like workload, pace of work, whether or not we have breaks from work for a mental break, whether workers have job control, what level of control do they have over the way they undertake work, and do we have sort of support from supervisors. We know that physical hazards can certainly cause load and stress and strain on our bodies, which can damage tissues, but psychosocial factors also have an effect on our body tissues through things like stress responses, which can lead to particular, muscle tension and postures that we adopt when we're stressed, but also, importantly, through hormonally mediated responses. So when our body is under any sort of stress, whether it be social or psychological or workload-related stress, the hormones that are released in response to that stress also have an effect on our bodily tissues. So the true picture of how musculoskeletal disorders develop is certainly a lot more complex than just looking at the physical and environmental hazards. And if we really paint the full picture, we can see that psychosocial hazards also very much impact and influence how we can be injured in the workplace. So here we see a pathway through which a stress response releases hormones, can even, for example, sensitize our bodies or make us more sensitive to pain, for example, so that we perceive pain differently when we're in certain psychosocial states. So this is much more the true picture of the factors that we need to consider and even identify in terms of what's potentially causing musculoskeletal disorders in our workers. So it's really important to remember that it's not just the physical hazards around hazardous manual handling that we need to consider, but on the screen you see a much more comprehensive list of things that we need to consider, including concepts around the environment and psychosocial factors that also influence risk of injury. It might pay to pause the video and actually have a really good read through these lists. So as an example, if we think about working in the cold, we know that working in the cold means that our bodies are not warmed up, our muscles are not warmed up, they're not as elastic, they're not as primed and ready for action. Blood flow is not as good to our muscles when we're not warmed up. And so that all increases our risk of injury, of strain and sprain. Similarly, there's a whole host of psychosocial factors here to consider. And let's think back now to Joe's situation. What else might be going on for Joe in his line of work? Well, if we think about the extra information we gave you a few slides ago, we know that Sue likes to give Joe a little bit of hurry up. And so Joe is not taking the breaks that he should be taking, meaning that his body's not getting any sort of rest and recuperation, and his tissues aren't sort of catching up to the workload, and he's at a higher risk of injury. Consider too that Joe may not have a lot of job control if he doesn't feel like he has the ability to speak up and say, hey, look, I'm not comfortable lifting heavy couches, right? He may feel pressure to continue to do that. If there's not open dialogue between Joe and his supervisor, he may not feel like there's very much support for what's happening with his current symptoms and aches and sprains. So all these factors really should be considered as part of this stage of identifying hazards as it relates to manual handling and musculoskeletal disorders. So we really do need to look at the bigger picture to see what else could be contributing to injuries. If we think back to that analogy of our backpack with rocks, manual handling is really only one type of rock that we could be adding to our backpack and our workload. So we should ask ourselves, what other types of rocks are we putting into our backpacks or our workers' backpacks? The key to understanding how and why musculoskeletal disorders occur is considering the interaction between different risk factors. And it's these interactions between the different types of rocks that lead to injury. So let's look at the rocks that's been added to Joe's backpack. So here we see in this section over here, over on the left, we have a manual handling rock. So we might have, for example, the repetitive bending of Joe's back to vacuum and mop. Then we have the long duration rock. So Joe is completing this repetitive bending all day long. We then also have the frequency rock. So there are very short cycle times of rest in between all the activity. So the frequent bending of Joe's back to constantly vacuum and mop. We've got the psychosocial rock. How is the work organized? What are the social contexts? So think about the work pressures. We know that Joe's boss keeps giving Joe and Sue new clients, adding to his workload, and he's not able to take rest breaks at the moment. We know that he's using his client's equipment, so he doesn't really have that sense of job control. He might have KPIs that he needs to work, all driving this sense of needing to work harder and faster. Then we might also have an environment rock. So the layout of the client's house means that he must move furniture constantly to get into those nooks and crannies and hard to reach places and bend even deeper and further and more often. Let's think about also in this section over here, the example of high force. So for example, having to lift heavy furniture, which involves, of course, high force. He might choose to perform that lift quickly because of the workload pressures, for example. He then might combine this with an awkward posture as he bends and lifts. Increased work pressures, might be that he wants to be efficient and do the job really quickly as well. And it might be awkward to maneuver around the client's home because of some of those environmental concerns and the limited space that they have. And then in this section over here, we can think about awkward postures. So remember that there are awkward postures like reaching overhead to dust the top corners of the walls and the ceiling, or even just wiping walls. And again, we have this combined with the fact that he's holding these postures for long periods of time, what we consider to be a sustained awkward posture. And that, again, is combined over long duration. So he may do this for more than that 2-hour accumulative time period over the course of his whole shifts, or even half an hour at a time. Those two things define long duration. And then we might think about the work pressures. So, the inability to take rest breaks, again, having to use the client's equipment, all those sorts of things. And we can also relate this back to, I guess, something that we can all sort of relate to in the sense of our everyday life, like something like as simple as tying your shoe. Sure, we may bend down and adopt an awkward posture while we do that, but we're only doing that once and we're not sustained. So our exposure and our risk of injury there is very low. This is a very different situation to when you're in the context of a workplace and perhaps you're performing hundreds of repetitions. You don't have the job control to decide not to tie your shoe, for example. And it's all these other factors in the way they interact together. That's really the important part that we also have to consider in this stage of identifying hazards. So when we talk about controlling risk, over the next few slides, we need to think about how we can control all of these environmental and psychosocial factors as well as the physical ones. So let's now move on to stage 2 in this risk management process, which is to assess the risk. And you'll remember that you can go straight from step 1 to step 3 if you can readily identify a control. But this risk assessment stage can actually provide some really great, valuable extra information about what hazards are present and inform us as to what controls are best suited to deal with those hazards. So to this end, WorkSafe have a really great tool called the Hazardous Manual Handling Risk Assessment and Control Tool. There's 2 parts to this tool: assessing the risk, and then step 3 is controlling. We're going to now have a look at that tool in a couple slides time. You can find this tool again as an appendix that's attached to the Hazardous Manual Handling Compliance Code. And there's also a version of it that you can find on WorkSafe's website as a standalone document as well, if you just do a search for Risk Assessment and Control Tool. So before delving into a risk assessment, it pays to take a little bit of time to actually plan the process. Firstly, we want to make sure that we have done stage 1 really well, that we've used a tool to help guide us through the identification, and that we've actually registered and logged all the hazards that we've identified. We might also have chosen to use the discomfort tool as another means of consultation and also to help identify some of the hazards. We may have reviewed incident data to identify any sort of trends. And hopefully we've selected some specific tasks that we can now zero in on and focus on, the highest priority hazards that we will do a risk assessment on. It pays to actually have a think about who will be engaged in the process, who's going to do the risk assessment. And remember that we don't have to have any special qualifications in order to do a risk assessment. Using the tool that WorkSafe's provided, any leader within the business can do a risk assessment. So let's have a look at the next stage and have a look at the tool. So let's have a look at the risk assessment process. In a moment, we're going to flick to the actual risk assessment control tool that we see here pictured on the right. But as you'll see, it actually guides you through considering not just the physical, but also the psychosocial and environmental risk factors that might be present. It's going to help us to look at what are the sources of risk, what is influencing all these contributing factors, and the tool will also guide us through the different control measures. So let's have a look at the tool. Okay, so here we see WorkSafe's Hazardous Manual Handling Risk Assessment and Control tool. I'm going to just quickly orient you to the whole of the tool, and then we'll go through it in some depth. We can see here it's 9 pages long. It does a really great job of guiding you through each stage with plenty of explanations and guidance. On the very front page, we see that it gives you a really great definition to start with around what is manual handling. It also describes what hazardous manual handling is and how that can link to musculoskeletal disorders. It also reminds you that this tool makes up part of the compliance code. It's actually Appendix D in the compliance code. And of course, the compliance code gives you lots of extra information about how to manage the risks of injury from hazardous manual handling. So I encourage you to read that if you haven't. And there's a link right in this tool to that code. On the very front of the page, we have the ability to add some information to help us be good record keepers, adding the date of assessment, adding the position, for example, that we are looking at. I'm going to put the name of our assessors as myself, and of course I'm going to have Joe along with me. I've put the incident number here, as well as Joe's already had an incident. On page 2, we see that it asks us to list anyone that's involved or consulted in the process of this hazard identification. I, of course, added Joe's name here. If workers are represented, for example, by a HSR, You could also include them in the process and list their name here. Here on page 2, it also asks us to name the work or activity, and I'm going to be very specific to this particular hazard identification process. We're going to look just at vacuuming and mopping. I'm not going to look at the whole of the role and all of the work, but we're going to look very specifically at these two tasks, which are pretty physically similar, so we can put them together. We've indicated the location of the work or activity is in clients' homes, which of course is various locations. We also want to make sure that we include the van, which also forms part of the workplace for these workers. Here the tool asks us to describe the work or the activity, and this may seem obvious to you as someone perhaps within the organization who already knows the role, but imagine writing this for someone else who's not familiar with the role. We want to put as much detail in there as is required to help understand what the role involves. So I've just said here, cleaning tasks are undertaken at clients' homes. Cleaners typically use the client's mops and vacuums in lieu of bringing their own. We mentioned that they typically vacuum and mop for up to 20 to 30 minutes per job and visit about 4 to 5 job sites or clients per day. The tool also prompts us to indicate which bits of information we've reviewed as part of this process. We're going to definitely tick this one. We've reviewed Joe's incident report. If there was any hazard inspection reports or related, we could tick that as well. If there was a workers' compensation claim that was relevant to the task that we're analyzing, we could tick that one as well. But for the moment, we're going to say review records of injuries, and we're also going to say that we've reviewed the discomfort survey results as given out to the workers. Here on the next page, we see that the tool starts to guide us through the actual risk assessment. Okay, so here in step 2, it asks the question, is there a risk of musculoskeletal disorders? And the first question it asks is, does the work involve repetitive movement? So here in this very first part of step 2 is looking at, are there any repetitive or sustained movements, forces, and awkward postures? And the very first thing we're going to say, does it involve repetitive movement? For Joe, we can say yes, because it involves repetitive movements of the shoulders and arms to either vacuum or mop, doesn't it? It gives us some examples if we're not sure about what the tool is getting at. So it gives us some good examples here. It then asks us, does the work involve a repetitive or sustained application of force? Now, this is a really good point to remind you about what is repetitive and what is sustained. So as per the Hazardous Manual Handling Compliance Code, you'll remember that repetitive is anything more than twice in a minute, and sustained is anything held for more than 30 seconds. So we said yes to repetitive movement, that's for sure. Does it involve repetitive or sustained application of force? We'll say yes to that because sometimes there's a bit of scrubbing involved. And as we remember from the mopping and vacuuming, that sometimes they actually move furniture around and things like that as well. It gives us good examples of what might be considered to be a repetitive force or a sustained force. It then asks us, does the work involve sustained awkward postures? Now we know from Joe's discomfort survey that it well might, because sometimes those mop handles or vacuum wands are too short and he's adopting a sustained stooping posture. So we'll say yes to that one. And then it asks, as a second part of this step, it asks us around work duration. Is the work being undertaken for a long time or long duration? Now, long duration, as we pointed out before, is anything that's more than 2 hours accumulatively over the whole shift or continuously for more than 30 minutes at a time. I'm not sure if Joe would vacuum or mop for more than 30 minutes at a time. We might just say no to that one, but certainly over the course of a whole shift, I think he'll be likely to do at least 2 hours. So we'll say yes to long duration under work duration. The tool then prompts us that if we answered yes to any of the factors under 1, that is, that it involves repetitive or sustained application of force, repetitive movement, or sustained awkward postures, and it also involves long duration, then there may be a risk of musculoskeletal disorder. So that right away, the tool is guiding us as to the level of risk. Now on the next page, the tool asks, does the work involve high force? Now we'll say for Joe's work that it does because it involves moving heavy lounges. And examples of heavy force are given here in the tool. And the tool prompts us that if we answered yes to this point here under 3, then there is a risk of musculoskeletal disorder, even if it's not done for a long duration, right? So if high force is involved at all, then there's a risk of musculoskeletal disorder. Step 4 asks around environmental factors. Are there any environmental factors increasing the risk? We'll say yes to this one, because we do know that sometimes our cleaners are exposed to weather. They also have to work in heat and cold and humidity. We're not in control of how the client's homes are set up or whether they choose to use air conditioning and heating, etc. The tools certainly apply. That's a bit of a contentious issue with these workers around having to use short-handled mops and vacuums. There's a vehicle involved. Lighting may be a concern at some particular clients' homes, as might be obstructions, and certainly floor surfaces might pose a concern if, for example, they're particularly slippery. We've expanded on some of these points here by saying that, yes, floor surfaces may be an issue, particularly with regards to exposure to wet floors and the risk of slipping. And under obstructions, we just expanded that sometimes our workers may be limited by the amount of space due to the layout of the client's homes. The tool then prompts us that if you answered yes to 4, that there may be a risk of musculoskeletal disorder or an existing risk, as identified previously or about to in other areas, the environment may actually increase that risk, and we should investigate further. Step 3 is to think about a whole variety of other sources of musculoskeletal disorder risk. And it reminds us that sources of risk include things like the workplace layout, the systems of work, the things that are used in the hazardous manual handling, so perhaps the tools or materials, then the workplace environment, and of course organizational or psychosocial factors as well. The tool then prompts us on the next page to think about the workplace layout. So thinking about the available workspace, workstation design, and furniture. And it asks us to provide a description of the workplace layout. Now you can get really detailed about this. And in fact, the more detailed you are, the better your risk assessment will be. But we've indicated here that the workplace layout is going to be quite variable depending on the client's homes. And there may be furniture involved at some particular locations. There may be, for example, stairs, going up and down stairs if it's a split level home. And of course, there's variable temperature and environmental conditions. We also need to think about the systems of work. So thinking about things like the policies, procedures, the way our workers work, the equipment that they use, materials, and the environments that they work in. And so we need to think about how these systems of work can influence, for example, the work design, the pace and flow, workload, etc., etc. So this is our chance to provide a description of the different systems of work. And you can, again, put as much detail as you can, put in anything that's relevant to identifying hazards or measuring the risk of injury. Here I'm going to say that workers work in teams of 2 to 3 cleaners. That work is carried out to a pretty strict schedule to facilitate about 3 to 4 cleaning jobs per shift. Work is allocated by an office manager, so the teams aren't in direct control of the amount of work that they have to accomplish in a day. We also note here that workers should be taking a morning and afternoon tea break as well as a lunch break, but we acknowledge that this is not always occurring. We should also add in the systems of work here that workers tend to use clients' equipment, specifically mops and vacuums, right? So important information to add. On the next page, the tool then prompts us to think about the things that are used and the materials. So examples of the things used might include, the nature, the size, or the weight of the things that are handled, the tools and equipment being used, and any mechanical aids. And so here I've noted that the teams currently use clients' tools like vacuums and mops, These tools may therefore vary from one residence to the next or one client's home to the next. We do provide them with a mop bucket though, and we've indicated here what size that is and indicated, of course, that it doesn't have wheels because that's something that Joe pointed out that we should be thinking about adding to our mop buckets. Then in the next section, under psychosocial factors or organizational factors, it asks us to think about things like work demands, the level of control over work, the levels of resourcing, and the amount of support by management, supervisors, and colleagues. And so what I've indicated here is that some workers are reporting that they receive, for example, all the difficult jobs or all the tough jobs. Workers are not necessarily in control of the numbers of jobs or the types of jobs that are being allocated to them. We've also heard reports of teams skipping breaks and meals due to time constraints or perceived time constraints. And some teams are feeling that we need to add another team of cleaners to better share the workload. So feeling like they're doing perhaps too much work and we need extra staff. Now this next section is all about controlling the risk. So we're going to come back to that after looking at a few more slides. So having completed the risk assessment, we can now turn our attention to step 3, which is to try and control risk of injury or risk of musculoskeletal disorder. And to that end, we can continue using the tool that we were just using. You can see that in this hazardous manual handling risk assessment and control tool that the control section is just a flow on from the risk assessment. So we're going to come back to that tool in a minute. But before we do that, let's have a good look at some of the theory behind controlling risks. The hierarchy of controls is a system or framework that we use to think about the best way to control hazards in the workplace. And if we look at the hierarchy of controls, we see that at the very top, we have the most effective method of reducing risk of injury, and that is to eliminate the hazard or the risk. And you'll notice that as we go down the hierarchy to other strategies, they're less and less effective. So up here at the top, this is clearly the most effective way, for example, to minimize the risk of injury for Joe in his workplace. If we're going to specifically pick one type of hazard, let's say the risk of injury from the application of high force when he lifts furniture, the best way to eliminate that would be to make sure that Joe never has to lift heavy furniture, right? And we could do that in a number of ways. One example, Joe gave us a suggestion in his discomfort survey, is to be sure that clients move furniture in advance so that workers are not having to move it for every job. We might also implement a blanket policy that everyone knows about, that our cleaning staff are not to handle, move, lift furniture. And that would eliminate that particular hazard of the hazardous manual handling of the application of high force. Now, if we think more broadly about Joe's work, we remember that there are other types of hazards that we identified. So some of the sustained awkward postures of using short-handled mops and vacuums, and the repetition of the movement, for example. Can we eliminate all of those hazards? Well, we may not be able to eliminate all of them. We should still always strive to eliminate them. But if we can't eliminate a hazard, we then look to try and at least reduce the risk of injury by using something like substitution, isolation, or an engineering control. So let's have a think about what exactly these strategies are and how they apply, for example, to the cleaning industry or Joe specifically. So substitution is where we replace a hazard or something that's a high risk with something that's less hazardous or less risky. So for example, if we're talking about maybe even cleaning products or cleaning solutions, we might replace caustic, acidic, harsh chemicals with chemicals that have a lower level of hazard associated with them, safer chemicals. Another example of substitution would be, for example, to replace the short-handled equipment that we use with longer-handled equipment. So we may not be completely eliminating the need to do some of that repetitive action, but we're at least eliminating one component, which is the sustained awkward posture from having to stoop down all the time. So that might be an example of substitution. That's also, in a way, an example of an engineering control. Engineering controls are where we use equipment, anything that provides some sort of mechanical advantage that reduces the stress, strain, or load, or the hazardous element. So another example of an engineering control would be if we think about Joe's use of mop buckets, reducing the need to pick up and carry mop buckets by introducing mop buckets that have wheels, right? So something as simple as a wheel can be an engineering control that reduces significantly the risk of injury for Joe and the team. And then we have the concept of isolation. Isolation is really where we physically separate or isolate people from the hazard or the risk. So an example of isolation would be, for example, installing guarding on a machine to prevent access to its moving parts, or creating some sort of physical barrier or exclusion zone around tasks or in between, say, workers and pedestrians and forklifts or other plant. Machinery or vehicles that have enclosed cabins, for example, that is isolating them from the risk of falling debris, for example. So we can think about using any of these solutions to try and reduce risk or reduce the risk of injury. Now, the next down our list, remembering that we're getting less and less effective, the next on our list is administrative controls. This includes the concept of, for example, providing training, where you're trying to change workers' behaviors, maybe including signage and instructions, having policies and procedures. Those types of controls might form part of the overall picture of controlling the risk and controlling risk of injury, but they're not effective in and of themselves. So we should never rely on these lower level controls as our primary method of controlling risk of injury. And down the bottom, we have things like PPE or personal protective equipment. And when worn correctly and in the right circumstances, of course, PPE is very important, but we would never solely rely on PPE to protect our people from the risks of hazardous manual handling, for example. So in reality, we want to try and use the highest level of control that we can. And in practice, we often find that we need to use a combination of different types of controls. So if we come back to that document that we were using, this is, if you remember, the risk assessment and control tool. And a few pages down at section 4, we see that this flows on to controlling risks. And it reminds us in this tool that an employer must, so far as reasonably practicable, eliminate any risk of musculoskeletal disorder associated with hazardous manual handling. And if it's not reasonably practicable to eliminate the risk, then we must, so far as reasonably practicable, reduce the risk. And you can find more information about controlling risks in Regulation 27 of the Occupational Health and Safety Regs, and it even gives you a link prompts to us through some very the regs right there. Important questions. Can the risk of musculoskeletal disease or disorder involving hazardous manual handling be eliminated altogether? In this case, we would probably say no. And if the answer is no, then can they be reduced, for example, by changing the work layout? And look, the answer for us largely there is we'll say no, specifically for the purpose of vacuuming and mopping. Can we change the systems of work for Joe and the team? We'll say yes to that because we can. We are in control of how we approach our work. Can we change the things used in the hazardous manual handling? Definitely yes. In fact, we already talked about and have plans for changing the equipment. Can we change the workplace environment? Not really. Not insofar as it's, a residential home and it's someone else's home. Can you positively address any current psychosocial hazards? Well, yes, we can. We know about some of those psychosocial factors around the pace of work and the lack of breaks and job control, so we can think about what we can do about those. And can we use a combination of the above? Absolutely, great idea. Can we also use information, instruction, or training to support the above control measures to reduce the risk even further? Now, if we want to use information, instruction, and specifically training, we need to be sure that the training involves these things as well. This tool reminds us that training needs to be work specific, and that providing how to lift training and basic instructions like bending your knees and keeping your back straight is not effective in reducing injury risk and shouldn't be used as the sole or primary means for controlling musculoskeletal disorder risk. So if we're going to use training, what should it include? It prompts us, and we can tick all of these things. For example, how to do work safely. And we're going to be very specific about what work we're talking about, vacuuming and mopping. How to report problems and maintenance issues. This is a great idea to include in training. So reminding Joe and the team about how to report their concerns, hazards, discomfort, etc. How to identify hazardous manual handling. Absolutely. We want to teach Joe and the team about the ins and outs of what is hazardous manual handling, how to identify it, how to report it. And then how to assess musculoskeletal disorder risk from the hazardous manual handling. Sure, we can include that if we'd like in terms of upskilling our workers to understand those ideas as well. And then also inform them as to how control measures are being used to minimize the risk of injury. So we can inform and train Joe and the team on the things that we're changing about the way they work to keep them more safely. This reminds us also that training must be reviewed regularly. Now in step 5, it actually prompts us to think about implementing the control measures and some of the details around that. So what are the actual short-term actions required? And by short-term, we mean sort of immediately to within those first few weeks. So what are some of the things that we can do immediately for Joe and his team? Well, we can immediately, as an example, replace mop buckets with wheeled versions. And if we wanted to keep the weight down in the mop buckets, we could use a reduced capacity or size bucket so that Joe and his workmates are unable to fill a mop bucket up with, say, 15 or 20 liters of water. We might choose a smaller mop bucket. What are some of the other short-term control measures we can put in place? Well, one of the things that we could do is to supply all of the cleaning teams with own mops and vacuums. Now, whether or not this is something that we can have the budget for to do short-term or medium-term, that's a bit of a decision that we'll have to make. But certainly that's something that we can do. And so you'd itemize all of the short-term actions, the medium-term actions, and the long-term actions. You would identify really clearly who's responsible for making these changes and implementing these controls. What is the intended completion date? So we might say, put an actual date in there, but it'll be something within the next 2 weeks. We might choose a review date of, say, 3 months or 6 months to look at whether these things have actually been implemented as intended and whether they're actually being as effective as we intended them to be. Some of the things that we might include in the medium term, things that we can't do all that quickly, is we might actually have to provide education to existing clients about the way that we are changing our approach to work and asking them to actually move furniture ahead of time. As you can imagine, we might experience some resistance from our regular clients, and this might take a little bit of time to educate them and change these practices. So there will certainly be some medium-term things. If there are things that require a little bit of budget allocation or procurement of tools and resources, then again, these things might take more of a medium-term outlook. And then, of course, long-term, within several months, are those things that will take a little bit of extra time to accomplish. So in this section, we will certainly include some of those aspects of training. If we're really going to develop some good quality training, it might take some development and some consultation with our team members. And so that, for example, might be a long-term action. So this is a really great tool that helps you make sure that we really time frame some of our intended actions and think about them in stages. And so if we think back to Joe, some of the problems that we were talking about around, for example, Joe bending to lift or drag a heavy bucket and spilled water from the bucket is a slip risk. We also have the problem of the short mop handle requiring overreaching and bending, and the vacuum cleaner wand is too short, resulting in awkward postures. We, of course, have some immediate fixes that we've identified here. So using a bucket with wheels to remove the need to bend and lift. We've got a long-handled mop to remove the need to bend. And again, a long-handled vacuum wand that can be perhaps even adjusted to the worker's height. And remember too that when we're implementing controls, like at every other stage in the risk management process, we need to be consulting with our workers. So before we go out and buy long-handled vacuum wands or mops or buckets, it pays to consult with our workers about our plan to do that. They may have some valuable input or some specific requests that we hadn't even considered, and this would be the perfect time to include that feedback through a consultation mechanism as well. And so returning to our roadmap, we can see that after controlling the risk comes step 4, which is to review and revise our risk control measures. And so some of the things that we want to include at this stage are, again, perhaps thinking about doing an additional or repeat survey for measuring musculoskeletal disorder risk or pain and discomfort levels. So think about, do we do another pain and discomfort survey, perhaps 6 months, 12 months after implementing some of these changes? We could also think about monitoring employee, absence, thinking about what our capacity has been like. Have we had any further staff turnover? Have we had any incidents, injuries, or claims related to those same issues that we were seeing before? So looking at the data, consulting with our people, and thinking about, have the controls that we've implemented been effective or not? And that step brings us to the close of the risk management process. And remember again that at every step, we should be including this concept of consulting with our workers, making sure that that consultation and communication is two-way. So we're not just informing them of decisions being made after the fact, but we're seeking their input, considering that input before we make a decision on a health and safety matter. That we completed, we have the opportunity to ask any questions. Now, I would just also remind you that we do have a monthly live question and answer session that is remains available to you to dial into if you had any questions out of today's review. Just to summarize and revisit some of those main points around the learning objectives, hopefully out of today, you've learned how to identify hazardous manual handling, and specifically have understood that there's actually a tool that you can use put out by WorkSafe called the Hazardous Manual Handling Risk Assessment and Control Tool, that we have been able to identify manual handling that causes pain or discomfort through the use of WorkSafe's discomfort survey, which we encourage you to use, that you are able to complete a risk assessment, particularly in consultation with workers, using the risk assessment and control tool that we ran through, and that using that tool, you're also able to identify some of the most effective controls for hazardous manual handling in your workplace. Now, as you might remember from the live webinar, the support from WorkSafe doesn't end just with this training session. I would remind you that there are those monthly live Q&A sessions with the WorkSafe ergonomist and myself, or a training facilitator, that there is, and you can expect, a phone call at both the 1 month mark and the 6 month mark post the education session, that you can always reach out to WorkSafe specifically with any manual handling related requests at this email, manual_handling@worksafe.vic.gov.au. And they're there to support you with any of your very specific questions. And then there is also this component of OHS consultancy support. So the OHS Essentials program is a program designed and run by WorkSafe, whereby small to medium-sized businesses have access to an OHS safety consultant that comes to your workplace to provide face-to-face, side-by-side support to you at no cost to you, fully subsidized by WorkSafe. So there are three free visits that they make with the intention to help you identify any sort of hazardous manual handling in your workplace and help you run through the risk management process, use all the tools that we've run through today and maybe even some more, and generally assist you with meeting your OHS obligations. If you're interested in that, I highly recommend that you visit WorkSafe's website, search for OHS Essentials, or you can see the full link there on your screen. So with that, we will close today's review and revision of the Manual Handling Basics theory. Want to wish you all the best in your journey along making your workplace safer from hazardous manual handling. Encourage you to reach out to WorkSafe if you have any questions or queries around manual handling. There's the email there on your screen now. Also encourage you to attend one of the live Q&A sessions to ask any sort of specific questions you might have in follow-up of the education program, and highly encourage you to check out the OHS Essentials program as well. And with that, we'll close, and I wish you all the best. See you next time.